It was a very like task-based operation, extremely skills-based. I remember just being, honestly, just like super impressed with the level of skill of the people who had been doing this for a long time, and also just the lack of skill that I think a lot of people see those sorts of things and go like, oh, that looks easy, or they see it on TV or they see it on movies, and they think it's just something you go out there and do, and they don't realize the amount of skill that actually goes into it. And so that was kind of the introduction, and for whatever reason, it just really planted a seed with me, and was something that just started very gradually with me just going up there more and helping. But every time I went up there, I learned a little bit more, and then eventually I had a GI Bill benefit that I ultimately used to get some education in there. Never, honestly, I never had a goal in mind. I never thought I'd be able to do this full time. It was just something I was super interested in. And for the first time, I was like, you know what, I'm just going to, kind of go to school for something I actually want to do. And it was more for myself. And so I did a program in beef cattle production. And yeah, so that was kind of the introduction to it, but definitely not the traditional start to ranching.
Yeah, it's interesting. You're actually touching on a couple of things that I hadn't anticipated necessarily talking about, but it makes sense now that I think about it. So one, which I'll come back to, is, and you mentioned about the Navy, and then you mentioned about this as well, is not necessarily having a set, rigid plan that you are working towards, which I actually think is a value add that a lot of veterans don't understand. Again, I'll come back to that. But the other thing is this idea of on the job training. You and I worked in very different um, units in the military, but both still in small units, right? You're working in a small unit capacity on the soft side. I'm working on a small unit capacity on the flight line, working on a crew of three as we're loading munitions onto and into fighter jets. And on the job, like when I went to my tech school, A school, what they call it in the Navy, like I didn't touch a jet. Like everything was classroom. Everything was kind of understanding safety and getting ready to get on the job to then learn the job on the job. And now, flash forward to both of us working in very different industries. You're in more of like manual labor and ranching, and I'm more in creative services on video and photo production. But again, when I got into this industry, the thing that really got me excited about it was that idea of on the job training. You go to film school, you can go to ad school, and you can build a portfolio. But until you're on the job working with other professionals that have been doing it for a long time while you were doing something else, like you're not really actually going to learn that job. And so I think veterans can we tend to be, I think these jobs are attractive to us where we need to get into an environment where we understand that we're not as good as everybody else, but that gives us something to work towards. And it's a little bit smaller. We're not working towards a career ladder. We're working towards being able to do the things that those guys and gals are doing that we're observing, as we don't have that capacity currently.
Yeah, and a couple things there. For me, there were so many parallels between production agriculture and ranching in the military, and I'll talk about what some of those were. But I think a huge thing for veterans, right? Like we all come out of this very almost structured like crawl, walk, run, and typically there's an education component, and typically you're lacking the experience component, and it's the combination of those two things that actually make a skill set that that develops into like a level of high performance, right? And for me, I had very little experience in the space. I had a desire to do it, and I started out with like a very baseline training. And I think like anything, right? Like you could come in with this like super great book education, you could have all this schooling, and it really doesn't mean anything when you get to the job. It's all great, and it gives you like a foundation and a base, but it doesn't. It gives you something to grow, but what takes to build on that foundation is the experience of actually doing it, and then also people there, like you said. Like I remember being in the SEAL teams and being a brand new guy, and you would almost find somebody in your platoon, typically that had been there a lot longer than you, and you sometimes you wouldn't even tell them, but you would pick that person and go, I want to be like them. And that would be the person you would bother with. Hey, how do you do this? Like, how do you set your gear up? Hey, can you work through this with me? And if you were somebody that they saw value in themselves, they typically would help you. And for me, getting into ranching and agriculture, I had so many people that helped me, but I also had to be realistic with the fact that I wanted to learn this. I wanted to gain the skill set they had. And I had a very, very, you know, rudimentary understanding. I was at very much that crawl speed, And it took a lot of time, effort, and practice, but it also took a lot of time, effort, and people helping me. But I think there's a there's a component, right? You have to almost get that education component to then build the experience on. And I think a lot of veterans are used to that style of like, right? Like if you're a pilot and you've been flying planes your whole life, or you've shot scoped rifles your whole life, and you show up to the military, you're in day one, week one with the guy who's never even seen a scoped rifle or never even sat in the cockpit of a plane. And we all start from this very, baseline level. And it doesn't matter where you came from, it doesn't matter what your experience was. We all started from the same spot. And then it was like, what are you going to do with it? And I do believe that there's like a major education component, but it's not the only level that's going to make you develop into, kind of the professional that you want to become. But you also have to want to do it for the right reasons, right? You have to do it because you want to be really good at whatever that thing is, not because you think it's like other people are going to think it's cool, or the people that are successful in special operations selection courses want to go do that job. They don't want to go tell people, they don't want to go tell girls at the bar that, oh yeah, I'm this or I'm that. You have to really want to do that job, or you'll never make it through that selection. And I feel like getting into new career fields is pretty similar.
Yeah, I completely agree. It's one of my favorite things about how our culture has evolved. It's also one of the biggest challenges that we face. I've told this anecdote before, right? Like we all grew up with like our parents, friends, and their colleagues. They worked at one place. They went to college, then they worked at one place their entire career, and then they retired there. Whereas we all have these different options to jump laterally and kind of move our way, ping pong through and build a career ourselves, right? And it's this idea of, it used to be like you either have book smarts or street smarts, right? And to kind of like lowbrow way of looking at it, but really it's like what you're describing is you're integrating those things. I agree with you. I'm not dismissing the need for education, the need for understanding, the need for interest in those things, but you need those to then build those skills and experiences on top of, and you integrate those two things together as you work your way, through whatever your career might be.
Yeah, I think the biggest thing though is the interest, right? That for me, getting to ranching and production agriculture was the interest. That was the only driving factor in the beginning, with no actual goal. And I think so many veterans, we all come out of these organizations, right? For me, joining the SEAL teams, it's not just like the day you go to BUD/S to the day you get out of the military. There's years of thought and preparation that goes into that. And then you're finally doing it, right? And you're doing it for real. And then you get out and you go, well, what am I going to do next? And finding that next thing. And I think a lot of people, almost have this unrealistic expectation that they're going to find that next perfect thing right out of the gate, where that transition is a process. But I think what helps get you closer to what you want to do is when you're actually honest with yourself and pursue the things you're truly interested in.